Welcome to the Academic Womxn Amplified podcast. I'm your host, Kathy Mazak, tenured full professor, mom of three, and firm believer that the culture of academia needs to change radically. Women are revolutionizing academia within institutions that were not built for us. If you're ready to reject the culture of overwork, kick guilt and overwhelm to the curb, and amplify your voice to make a real impact on your field without breaking down or burning out, you're in the right place. And it all starts with writing. Let's go. If you know me at all, you know that I love podcasts. I used to listen to podcasts, dropping off the kids from school, bringing them back from school, and it would be about an hour each way by the time I dropped off all the people in all the places. And so it was normal for me to listen to about 2 hours of podcasts a day. Now that we're in quarantine and I'm recording this episode at the very beginning of August 2020, now that the kids are not going to school, they didn't go to camp, I'm struggling to find time to listen to my podcasts. But I decided that podcasts were a great way to kind of get my brain to think about something different. So the same way that I read novels or watch movies or series that I like, just to get my brain out of the academic world for a while, I listen to podcasts for the same thing. So now I listen to them while I'm cleaning up the house or folding laundry, or we have a little elliptical machine. So when I'm on the elliptical machine exercising or taking a walk around my house in circles. But this is all to say that I have found a ton of podcasts that I really love. And I've been listening to NPR podcasts about all kinds of different things. And I found that actually I love the NPR podcast called Planet Money. Now, Planet Money is about economics, which you might think like, why is she so interested in economics? But really, I find everything that they do on that show pretty fascinating. And this summer 2020, they did this special summer school series where they brought in 2 University of Michigan economists, Professors Justin Wolfers and Betsy Stevenson. And the podcast is it's really interesting. It's teaching you kind of basic principles of economics in a really kind of pop culture sort of way and with real life experiences. Okay, so I was listening to the first summer school episode. We're going to link it up in the show notes, where they featured all kinds of things about decision making and the cost benefit principle, opportunity costs, and sunk costs. And oh my goodness, as I listened to this podcast, all the synapses were firing about how these principles relate to writing. So today on the podcast, we are talking about the economics of writing. Now, there's a lot we could talk about in terms of the economic benefits of writing, but actually this podcast is going to be about decision-making around writing. Okay, so I learned from that podcast episode, and probably knew this way back from college somewhere, about the cost-benefit principle, right? So if the benefits of doing something outweigh the costs, then it's a pretty good choice, right? That's a good choice. You want to do those things where the cost is less than where the benefit outweighs the cost of doing it. All right, so I want to think about this in terms of writing. So there's lots of ways that we can look at the benefits of writing. In my program, so in Navigate, and mostly, we started talking about it in Navigate, but then we also talk about it a lot in Amplify and Elevate. So in my programs, we talk about payoff. So writing payoff. Now, writing can pay off for you in lots of different ways, okay? So these are the benefits of writing, right? The payoffs. And let me say too, let me talk specifically first about publications. So writing can pay off for you in terms of getting you a job, getting you promoted, getting you a speaking engagement, building your expertise in your field, building your academic brand. These are all ways that writing has a payoff for you. There's another, though, although that's one thing, right? Those are kind of like somewhat tangible payoffs. There's also payoffs in terms of just career satisfaction, happiness, joy in doing the work, right? So payoffs don't always have to do with money, but we always want to be, and in our programs, we think about all of these different ways that writing has payoff. It could have actual monetary payoff. It can have payoff in terms of job satisfaction, in terms of brand building, and all kinds of different things. So what we want to think about in terms of the economics of writing is applying this cost-benefit principle to making choices about projects that should stay in our pipeline and which project to work on next. Okay, so let's talk about which project to work on next first. At any moment, you probably have 3 to 10 writing projects in your pipeline. Now, how they got there, we can talk about that on another podcast, but it's generally pretty good advice to have more than one project going at a time, and those projects might be in different stages of completion. Okay, so maybe you have an article that you are in the writing stage, and you have another article that is in the data analysis stage, and then you have another project that's like, you don't know what it's going to be yet, whether it's going to be a book chapter or an article or a book or a white paper or something else, but you are in the research design stage. So that's an example of a pipeline where you have 3 different projects in 3 different stages of being done. And done, we're going to consider when it comes out in publication in a peer-reviewed medium. Okay, I guess a white paper wouldn't be peer-reviewed, but you see what I'm saying. When it comes out published in print. So I want to bring in this term that, again, right from the Planet Muddy podcast about opportunity costs. Okay, so when you're thinking about which project should I work on next, which is a really common question that I see people struggling with their pipelines. They're like, okay, because actually, let me be honest here and be honest with yourself, please. Like, how many projects are in your pipeline right now? It's probably not just 3, and they're probably not beautifully spaced at these different points in the pipeline where it makes it kind of obvious somewhat, what to work on next. Probably you have a clog in your pipeline somewhere. So you might have a bunch of data analyzed and no things written up. You might have a bunch of things partially written up, but not submitted. A lot of times when we're working with our clients, what we're doing is diagnosing where their pipeline clog is and helping them create a plan to get things through that clog, right? Things flowing. So this question about what should I work on next and for how long should I work on it is a question that we get all the time. So I want to think about that question today in terms of economics. I want to think about it in terms of opportunity costs. Okay, so opportunity costs, the basic idea, right, is that anytime you decide to do something, there is something else that you're not doing. Okay, and in the podcast episode, Doctors Wolfers and Stevenson say that the true cost of doing something is the next best alternative you've got to give up to get it. So what would you do in place of this thing that you're doing? That's what you're going to give up. That's the opportunity cost. So for example, let's say that you are following my writing advice and you are doing 3 one-hour writing sessions a week, either in your Tiger time or using co-writing. And so you basically have 3 hours a week to work on projects designated as writing projects. And so you sit down and you look at the different projects that you have in your pipeline, and you make a decision about which one to work on this week. Okay, let's say you're going to spend all 3 hours working on one particular project this week. You are giving up working on the other projects. Okay, the next best alternative. Let's say you have project A and project B. You choose project A. The opportunity cost is project B. And all the time we are making decisions like this, and it makes us have anxiety about what we're doing, right? It's like, I know that I only have 3 hours, so I'm going to choose this project, but I know it's at the cost of my other projects. And that can seem super stressful to people. So let's dig in a little bit more about opportunity cost and writing. So again, when you decide to work on one writing project, you're giving up the other projects, and that's making them take longer. So you're not necessarily giving them up forever, but you're definitely delaying the time that it would take for you to get them to publication. And we have to do that because we can't write more than one thing in the same hour. Time is linear for as much as we can control it right now without any time machines. So we have to make those kinds of decisions. But here's what I want to say to you. Making that decision between, one project and another project, yes, there's an opportunity cost, but also I want you to think about payoff. I want you to think about that cost benefit principle, right? When you're looking at possible projects you could work on, I want you to think, okay, does the benefit of publishing this project, or maybe even a different way to say it would the benefit of working on this project outweigh me spending an hour on it? And when you start to think that way, what I hope you'll do is really start to concentrate on high payoff projects. So either projects that give you a high amount of happiness, satisfaction, brain stimulation, all the things that academics geek out on, right? And hopefully they're the same, projects that build your academic brand, that are laying the foundation for you to go and get grant funds, that are building your pre-tenure dossier so that when you go up for tenure, you go up with confidence. Another thing I want you to think about in terms of opportunity cost and writing is that every time you sit down and you do email or you fiddle around with your PowerPoint presentations before class, during your Tiger Time, or during a co-writing session, instead of writing or moving a writing project forward, the opportunity cost is your writing. Okay. So I know that one thing that's really hard for people is to keep a date with their writing. So they know their Tiger Time, or they sign up for the Momentum program. And so they have prescribed co-writing sessions that they know they're going to come to. And still, when they sit down, let me just check email first, or, let me just respond to this thing first, or let me just map some things on my calendar first. And all of that, the opportunity cost there is your writing. You are losing the benefit of moving your writing projects forward at the cost of time spent on email and other things that are necessary, right? Like we can't just ignore email forever, as much as I would like to, but rather like things that are necessary to do, but that don't have a big payoff. And so you really want to use those great hours of the day when you feel motivated and excited, which is your Tiger Time or your co-writing time, to move writing projects forward. That's the opportunity cost. Okay. So what's the opportunity cost of working on writing projects that are low payoff or not aligned with your mission? That's another thing we need to worry about, right? When you sit down and you choose to work on projects, spend more time on projects, even if they're writing projects that aren't in line with your academic mission. And this, again, is something we teach in our programs, how to create an academic mission statement and align everything behind it. If you are working on something that is low payoff or not aligned with your mission, then you're giving up the opportunity to work on the high impact projects, the on-mission projects, the ones that are going to really move your career forward. Hey there, I'm just popping into the middle of this episode to let you know that applications are open for our Amplify Faculty Writing Accelerator program. Amplify is a year of pre-tenure support, which focuses on centering your writing while building the career that you really want. In Amplify, we believe that you can control your career, that you can shape it, and that the real work of pre-tenure is becoming the scholar who you want to be. We teach you that in the program through a combination of training, community, and coaching that has had amazing results for our members. You can join today by applying for our program at the link in the show notes. All right, now we've talked about cost benefit applied to writing. We've talked about opportunity cost applied to writing. And now I want to talk about sunk costs applied to writing. When I was listening to this episode on Planet Money and the professors were explaining what sunk costs were, I was like, oh my goodness, I need to record a podcast episode about this because all y'all are making the wrong decisions because you're considering sunk costs. So let me explain what I mean. So again, Professors Stevenson and Wolfers say that sunk costs are costs that cannot be reversed. So even if you quit something, like if you quit a project, you can't get the time that you spent on that project back. Or like, for example, if you were enrolled in a 3-credit class and you have to drop out, a lot of times you can't get that money back. That's a sunk cost. There's 1,000 examples. So what the professors in the episode said was, you can consider opportunity costs. You can consider cost benefit, but do not consider sunk costs when you are considering whether to stay with a project or let it go. So let me explain. The example that Stevenson and Wolfers used in the Planet Money episode was, if you go to the movies and you buy a $15 movie ticket, and then you sit down and you're watching the movie and you get like 15 minutes, half an hour into the movie, and it's horrible. And you start to think, I don't really want to listen to the rest of this movie. I don't want to stay here. I would be using my time so much better if I got up and left right now. I could take a jog, or I could read a book, or I could go get a coffee, and all of those things would be better than watching this movie. If you're in that situation, a lot of people would think, well, but like I paid for this movie, so I should just stay here and watch it instead of doing any of those other things. But an economist would say, no, you shouldn't, because the cost of the ticket is a sunk cost. The cost of the half an hour you already spent watching the movie is a sunk cost. You can't get your money or your time back, but you can move on and do something else so that you don't increase the sunk costs of doing something that you don't want to do. Okay? So I want to talk about this principle applied to writing. A lot of people have a bunch of projects in their pipeline, too many projects. Some of them are better than others. Again, in terms of payoff for your career, in terms of payoff for your happiness, in terms of payoff for your development as a researcher, right? We can think of payoff lots of ways. But probably if you were to list out all the projects currently in your pipeline, and what I mean by that is all the projects that are currently like in play in any stage of doneness, whether they are in the it's designed and I'm starting to collect data phase, or whether they're in the revise and resubmit stage. I want you to make a list of all of those projects. Okay. So when you get home, if you're jogging with listening to me in your earbuds, or you're driving a car or whatever, wait till you get home to make this list. I want you to make a giant list of all the projects in play. Okay, in any stage of the pipeline, any stage. And then what I want you to do is I want you to look at those projects. And I bet that you can find, first of all, I bet that you have 10 projects in play. And then second of all, I bet that there's 3 that really don't have high payoff for you. Now, in our Navigate program, we walk you through a process of doing this with rubrics and aligning with your academic mission statement and everything. But just for now, just a really quick and dirty approach to this. Identify 2 or 3 projects that you're like, they don't really fit anymore. They're going to be a slog to do. They don't have a high payoff in terms of my career. And I want you to look at each of those projects. Think about them in your mind right now. Think about how many hours you've spent on that project already. So maybe you haven't spent very much time at all. Maybe it's something that was just an idea. So it's easy to let it go, right? But maybe it's something that even you've started to write already. And so you have words on the page, you have data collected, you have hours and hours and hours of work in that project. But it's not a high payoff project. So applying the principle or the idea of sunk costs to that project, you absolutely want to let that project go because you can never get those hours back. You can never get the energy that you put into that project back. It's a sunk cost. You can't, an economist would say, don't use sunk costs in making a decision about whether that project should move forward or not. Especially because if you've already sunk a bunch of time in there, it's like that phrase, right? Throwing good money after bad, right? Like you shouldn't just keep throwing, it's like throwing good time after bad. Like you're going to put more time into a project that you know is low payoff. And when you do that, remember the opportunity cost. Every time you work on a project, you're choosing not to work on other projects. And that means that the cost of opportunity of working on an unaligned project or a project that doesn't help you, that's low payoff, the cost of that is your high payoff projects. So I want you to really think about the projects that are in your pipeline and listen to the economists. The economists would say, don't consider sunk costs when you're evaluating the projects in your pipeline. Don't consider them because you can't get them back. So there's no use factoring that in. Instead, what I want you to do as your writing coach is I want you to think about payoff. I want you to think, again, payoff, you can define it. In our programs, we talk about lots of different kinds of payoff that writing can have. But I will say this, though, that writing projects that are in line with your academic mission statement, that are going to be placed in publications that will count towards your tenure or promotion or getting a job or keeping your job, right? Any publication that really fills you up, that is the missing link or the link that's going to take you to the next level in your research trajectory that you have mapped for yourself, which absolutely could be a grant, right? Like foundational pieces that are going to lead to a grant. All of those things have high payoff. And that's what I want you to be working on. And every time you work on a project that isn't high payoff, the cost of that, the opportunity cost, are the high payoff projects. And so many of us, when we look at our list of projects and we see a project that we know doesn't fit anymore, we kind of go like, but I feel guilty cutting it out. Or I have co-authors I'm going to disappoint maybe by cutting it. Okay, we can deal with co-authors. And the way I always think about that is your co-authors may actually be really happy to be let go of for you to let go of your part in a project as well. I mean, we often think people are going to be mad at us, but sometimes people are happy. like, oh, good. She was dragging her feet on that project. I don't want her on it anyway. But the big idea here is don't consider sunk costs when you're making those decisions about what should be cut from your pipeline. Because as I've said before, the fewer projects that go into your pipeline, the more projects come out. Because you spend all your time and energy on that curated list of projects, the projects that has been culled down to just the ones that are on mission and high payoff for you. You let go of the other projects and all of your focus then is on a smaller number of projects, which means that they will come out of your pipeline faster and also at a greater number in a shorter amount of time. So if you are a podcast lover, I would absolutely recommend that you go and listen to the Planet Money podcast episode that I am referring to. It's their first summer school episode. It's an entertaining episode, but it will also teach you these basics of cost benefit principle, opportunity costs, and sunk costs and they really break it down talking about, decision making. And I want you to think about applying those concepts to your pipeline, okay? Applying those concepts to your writing. Thank you so much for spending your valuable time loving on yourself and your writing by listening to this episode. If you'd like to continue the conversation, join the over 7,000 academic women in the I Should Be Writing Facebook group. Just go to facebook.com/groups/I Should Be Writing or search for I Should Be Writing inside your Facebook app. See you inside.